Friends, grace and peace to each of you in the name of the risen Christ. We continue worshiping apart together during this time as we are in the midst of Eastertide, or the season of Easter, as we approach Pentecost on the last Sunday of May. Today we are in the second Sunday of Easter, and honestly right now, with everything going on in the world, finding resurrection is especially challenging. As we are sequestered in our homes, seeing people suffering job loss, furloughs, illness, and even death, it is more and more challenging to find resurrection in our lives. And yet, we come this Sunday standing with Thomas and the disciples encountering resurrection. Reading this gospel story reminded me of a story. A couple of months ago, while at the U.S.-Mexico border, we met someone who oversaw efforts in McAllen, Texas, around issues of hunger and poverty of children in South Texas. Part of her work was working with children whose families immigrated into the United States, making sure they had adequate food and resources. While her work is incredibly inspiring and important, her story is the reason that I share this. Someone asked her after the presentation how she came into this line of work, and she said, well, some years ago on her 25th wedding anniversary, her and her husband were planning to go on a trip together. The day they were going to leave, he came home and told her, it's over. No trip, no marriage, I'm going to divorce you. And just like that, the life she knew, the marriage she had, was completely dead. Her life felt like it had completely fallen off of a cliff. So she picked up the pieces of her life, asking God, what now? And she went on to receive her PhD at the age of 60 and became director of this program. Talk about experiencing resurrection. Theologian and author Kate Bowler, who in 2015, at the age of 35, was diagnosed with a form of incurable cancer, in her book, Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved, says, God, I am going to walk to the edge of a cliff. Build me a bridge. I need to get to the other side. Maybe this is resurrection. When we feel like our life is about to fall off a cliff, God builds us a way to the other side. The well-known painting by Caravaggio, which you can see in our at-home order of worship this morning, where Jesus and Thomas encounter one another, the scene is not one of Jesus rebuking or pushing Thomas away, as Thomas is usually vilified for his doubting. Instead, Caravaggio depicts Jesus literally guiding the fingers of Thomas into Jesus' wounds. If you look closely at Thomas's face in this painting, there's this look of amazement and shock. Maybe Thomas realizes the great mystery that we all share in together. You can be wounded and resurrected at the same time. And that is the beauty of encountering a resurrected Jesus. Not with a perfectly healed body, but with scars and wounds. Even Jesus in death and resurrection has wounds and scars from this world, because we won't get out of this life without wounds and scars. I remember in divinity school, my preaching professor, Dr. Luke Powery, telling us to preach from our scars, because that is how we can see Jesus. But it's not just preaching. Jesus invites us all to tell our stories from our scars, from some of the most tender places in our lives, and to receive people's stories, offering people a place to find refuge in the midst of the chaos of the world. Jesus' encounter with Thomas shatters any notion that we have to pretend like we have it all together. Jesus guides Thomas's hand. Jesus guides all of us in the midst of doubt, in the most tender, the most painful places in our lives. We have Jesus right in front of us, reaching out from death and pain to more life. And maybe that is the point of resurrection. He's not vilifying us for our doubt. He's showing up for us. Jesus even says, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. Now, I've heard this scripture proof texted and plastered in front of people as some kind of shaming around unbelief. Manipulating people into believing faith can only look a certain way. But we always have to remember the context of all of the blessings Jesus offers throughout the gospel. Blessed are you who mourn. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the peacemakers. Jesus does not condemn. Jesus offers a blessing. Jesus offers understanding, because believing without seeing is difficult. Just like mourning, just like being poor in spirit, like being a peacemaker is hard. Jesus intimately understands the complexity and harsh, scarring reality of life and offers us a blessing. Resurrection is completely and utterly complexing, because Jesus resurrected does not show up with a perfectly healed and whole body. If I would have written the resurrection story, I may be inclined to assume Jesus' resurrected body is completely healed and without any marks, but Jesus shows up with wounds and scars from the world, even in resurrection. Jesus is still marked by the world, kind of like each of us. Resurrection is not reversal. Jesus in the resurrection was recognized by his scars. He did not have that perfected, unscarred body. Jesus had scars like each of us. Scars that are physical, from surgeries, from injuries, from childbirth, and even emotional scars. Scars we carry on our hearts with us. With all of our scars from life, Jesus invites us to touch his scars, to not be ashamed of how our scars shape our lives, how our wounds and scars might make us doubt, how what is going on in the world might make us have some doubt around our faith. In fact, I actually like what Paul Tillich says about this. Doubt is not the opposite of faith. It is one element of faith. In spite of all the hurt and harm the world can and does inflict, of any doubt we might hold in our hearts because of what we have witnessed or experienced in our lives, God's compassion and care embodied in Jesus stands again in our midst. Jesus embraces the scars, the wounds, and the doubts we have with love. Our scars and wounds tell our stories, but Jesus says that we are not defined by them. We have bodies with scars, but Jesus resurrects our lives, and thanks be to God for this good news. Amen.